Hello and welcome back to Coding Bootcamp 2023. My name's Stephen Ball and we're going to be powering through learning about development with databases in this session. And we're going to be talking about InterBase. InterBase is a very powerful, lightweight database that you can use on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, and be able to store your data with your application on whatever platform you're targeting. So it's a very versatile and good to know database as a developer because it allows us to build once and get everywhere. So this is our developer's guide to getting started with InterBase and is going to be very much here just to help you get on and get going. So before we get in, who am I? My name's Stephen Ball and I'm the pre-sales director here at Embarcadero. I have been around InterBase since the end of the 90s. Working with it, and I've even spent time as the InterBase product manager, helping introduce kind of the IoT award-winning change views technology into InterBase, and help with a number of the new initiatives we've had go forward, like IB Lite and so on. So let me get in and talk about the agenda we're going to be covering today. I say this is very much a getting started session. So we're going to talk a little bit about databases, their uses, the different type of architectures that you're going to see around databases to help explain the different type of scenarios and how databases are connected to and worked with. So once we've got that understanding, we'll talk very quickly about what InterBase is, who uses it, to give you a little bit of an idea of the flavour of the different types of businesses that you use and work with databases. We'll cover the supported platforms and languages that InterBase provides for. Now, we're not going to dive into every single one here. That's a session in itself. But it's really just to kind of give you the idea that, wherever you're developing, whichever where your company is working, there's support there to help you with using InterBase. But where we really want to get into today is the developer edition. The developer edition of InterBase is a great place to start. It includes the chance to create, design, build your databases. It gives you a database file that, as I said, you can use across Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and Linux. It also provides the first way that you can get into using IB Console. And IB Console is a great tool to be able to manage and work with data. And you don't need to, as a developer, remember all the constructs and the setup for building and creating databases. You can use IB Console to help you along the way. So it's a great tool to learn the basics and the building blocks and actually look at your database and then be able to dive in and look at the metadata and so on. So we'll have a few quick tips and tricks as we go through there. After we've had a look at the number of the different composite parts of database as well, we'll finish off talking about licensing. There's a few free versions, there's some trial editions, there's some subscription options, so it's important to understand a little bit about the different options there. It's not particularly complicated, it just needs a quick explanation, but it's very simple to get up and going. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the deployment options and what you can do to help with deployment of InterBase. So let's get in. We're going to start off with a quick explanation about what a database is. Now, typically, a database is an organized collection of structured information or data, typically stored electronically in a computer system. Now, this is a pretty standard definition. One thing that's really important to understand about databases, though, is that a database is usually controlled by a database management system, a DBMS. So InterBase is a DBMS. SQL Server is a DBMS. Postgres, Oracle, they're all DBMSs. And the reason for a database management system is it provides the ability then to control communication to and from the database itself. It enables users to be controlled and managed in terms of their access to the data. It enables you to start using things like encryption to define what encryption levels certain data needs to be stored at. You can then bring those users and the encryption and the decryption rights together to ensure that only the people with the right access can actually access the data. So the whole setup of a DBMS is really important and takes a lot of stress out of development and provides a huge capability. And this is very important when you're trying to build and get your applications out to market and to do things in the right way and to be compliant with all the laws and regulations that are around. So there's a few different ways that a DBMS is deployed. The typical scenario is client server, and we'll talk about three different options here today. But typically a client server where you have a server somewhere, and then on that server you can access the database directly, but also you could connect to the server from a number of different clients. Now, InterBase supports clients running on Windows, Mac and Linux, and you can use what's called a protocol, an over-the-wire protocol, to communicate from the client to the server. Now, that's typically wrapped up in the components you've got, so it's very transparent. You just put down your database connection, you tell your database connection where the server is, and you can then use queries directly to fetch data from the server. Now, what happens on the client is it will go through the driver, and the driver will convert your request into an over-the-wire data packet, which is sent down the wire, and then the DBMS installed on the server will receive it, authenticate you, and then will run the query against the server and provide instantaneously back the data that you've requested. So this OTW, over-the-wire protocol, is the typical way that pretty much every database works. And what that means is that where you've got servers, you can set these to scale, quite a high size at the back end. But you could run this as a 64-bit application. But then you could have a mix of 32 or 64-bit clients that are connecting in, because the protocol is a socket communication that is sent over the wire. So that is different to a normal library. If you're building an application where you need to have a 32-bit or 64-bit library because your application is that, you do need the 32 and the 64-bit libraries to match your client build, but then the communication over the wire is just done over the wire, and then the server can be a different version. It doesn't need to be the same. So that's basically how servers communicate. Now, the other option, rather than having clients that are able to connect across the network, is to actually run the database inside your application. Now, this is a very deeply embedded application offering, and something that's not unique, but relatively rare to find in the kind of scale and the capabilities that InterBase offers. So InterBase provides a set of libraries that, instead of deploying the whole server, you can actually run InterBase inside your application, and they're statically linked in to your application at runtime. And as your application starts up, the database engine starts up in memory inside your application. Now, the reason InterBase can do this is it's built from the ground up to work on a very small footprint. Only a few meg is all that you need memory-wise for InterBase to be running. It really, really can just deploy everywhere. Its background was built to enable literally any machine to run a database, and because of that, InterBase to Go, which is our deeply embedded version, can be run inside one or many applications, but the data here is exclusive for that application. So if you've got an application running on your server here, this application could connect to its version of the database and work with it, but nobody else could connect into it. And the same for the other apps. When this app starts up, it could have its own copy of the data. Now, the different apps can't communicate between themselves, and the data is restricted to the only app that is working with it at the time, or one app at a time. But that is a very, very powerful engine and capability to have. Now, the other scenario that you see a lot of around databases today is a multi-tier deployment. Now, in this kind of scenario, you might have one or multiple databases behind a middle tier or an application layer that's running. So you've got your data layer and your application layer. Now, the mid-tier will have communication coming through it. Now, typically, this is going to be through REST or JSON nowadays. That provides a uniformed approach for any application programming language to be able to communicate to the server and to fetch data. And what that means is that you can be very transparent about the data. The data is literally transparent to the clients. You can completely change the back end here, and the clients would never know because they're just communicating through this mid-tier point. So here, all your data connections would go on from the mid-tier. So a bit like your client server before, you'd have your database server, you'd have your application tier, your mid-tier, which is communicating to the database, fetching the data back and forth, and then putting that into a data packet, which it's then sending out to the clients. Now, in these types of scenarios, the database here needs to be licensed for the number of clients. So we have an unlimited user license for InterBase, which you can use to work in these type of scenarios, which is fantastically simple just to deploy. But this means that also, especially when you're working with mobile, you're not exposing your database to the entire world. Using a mid-tier here like RAD server allows you to protect your database and enable that communication to work via REST, because the one thing on a client server setup, this is normally done on a local network, so the connections are going to be very stable. When it comes to working across multiple networks and when you're out and about, the connections are up and down. You can't hold a solid socket connection in the same way you can on a local network. So it's really important that we have these communications running through REST. And again, if you're going to look at doing multi-application tier development, then I'd highly recommend InterBase as the back end. RAD server actually uses InterBase inside it to manage all its users and security settings and everything. So it's very robust and very scalable. And then you have all the REST stuff going on. So if you're looking to do that, you need to understand this bit here, and then also the client side of things. So what is InterBase and who uses it? So hopefully now you've understood that InterBase is a database. Now, the one thing about InterBase is it's an embeddable database. And so that means it can be deployed inside or alongside your application. And in fact, InterBase has a silent installer as well, so you can even embed it into your installers without the end users having to see that you're kind of getting it installed and deployed. Now, the nice thing about it is it's very fast, it's a very small footprint, it's an admin-free database with full SQL 92 capabilities, it's very secure. So a lot of people use it, and it's highly used in medical because of what it can be done with and deployed, and you don't have to have a DBA sat alongside it. Some of the big database management systems have a very heavy footprint, need a dedicated server, need a lot of looking after to make sure they keep running. InterBase is loved by developers because it's just so simple to do and deploy. Now, there's 3 different versions of InterBase. We have the server edition, which is like the client server, allowing hundreds of connections to come through, and the same one that you'd use behind a REST server, a mid-tier server. We have the desktop edition, which is for Windows only, but it allows you to have multiple applications on the same machine, so a bit like a server, but only on a single machine. So you can have multiple different applications connecting into it. Now, that's really something more from a time gone past where people used to have lots of separate applications and they'd all connect to the same database on the same machine. You'd have a reporting application and maybe a stock application and a POS application. Nowadays, people tend to build a lot of the stuff all together, so it's a slightly different method, but you can do either or. Now, the other option we have is InterBase to Go, which I've mentioned about with the mobile side. Is deeply embeddable, runs inside your application, so there's no actual server to install, set up and configure. You literally just install the libraries, or you deploy the libraries with your application, and as your application starts, InterBase starts up in your memory space and off you go. Now, as I said, InterBase is used by a number of different companies around the world. Opus Capita process 500,000 transactions a day doing invoicing with a SaaS-based solution that they're providing out to local governments. We have Bsoft here, who do accounting software for most of Bulgaria, including covering the military, and PricewaterhouseCoopers and a number of different customers. Electrolux embed it deeply into a number of the things that they provide out with their washing machines. Bionuclear do it within their labs. Across Brazil, they've got hundreds of labs that are deployed out with InterBase there, managing their data for all the tests that they're running. Management Plus, big healthcare provider, using InterBase to store personal medical information with all the compliances that are required around medical and healthcare. So there's a huge number of different companies using it, and this is just a small subsection of logos, but it's heavily used across the world for server and mobile and the like. So how do you connect to InterBase? Well, there's a number of different choices from different languages. And within RAD Studio for Delphi and C++ builder, there's the FIDAC components, there's the IBX components, there's a number of different components there. Lots of documentation on the DocWiki about how to get going with those. There's also ODBC, JDBC, and ADO.NET drivers. And the ADO.NET drivers have recently been updated for the newer versions of .NET, and you can get those through GitHub, through NuGet, through Visual Studio, and there's the Entity Framework drivers in there as well. And also for Python, I've recently released updated drivers for Python. You can also connect up with PHP and Ruby. There's lots of different options out there, and with the ODBC and the JDBC driver as well, it means that you can pretty much connect to InterBase from most tools and platforms out there. So let's get our hands onto InterBase, and first thing we need to do is make sure we've got it installed. So we're going to quickly discuss the developer edition and then get into IB console and start playing around and seeing a DBMS in action. So if you do have RAD Studio, then you can go to the Tools, Manage Platforms, and under the dialog here you can find the additional options, which includes InterBase 2020 Developer Edition, or whichever the latest version is that you have. And the easy thing to do is just tick that box and hit apply, and that will then install and get InterBase going. Once you've got it installed, what you will need to do is just go to the server manager. If you type in server, find the InterBase server manager, you'll just need to make sure that you've got it running and you've started up for the first time. Once you've done that, it will automatically restart with Windows as you're going. Now, the developer edition does need to be restarted every 48 hours. It's just part of the security around it. So that's the only thing you need to be aware of. But perfect edition to start with. Now, if you don't have RAD Studio and you want to get the developer edition, if you go to the Embarcadero website, and under the free tools, you can go to get InterBase Developer, and from here you can fill in the form to get it sent over to you. If you've already got an EDN account, just change here to log in, and then you'll be able to download and get that straight away. Okay, so now we know how to get InterBase up and running. Let's start having a look at some of the basics and the key features of a RDBMS with InterBase. So I'm just going to go in and let's search for IB console here. IB console is our developer interface, and here we can see we have the ability to register servers. So we have the InterBase server running here. Now the developer edition runs as a full server to allow us to be able to connect other tools into the database. It means you can still build and develop with InterBase to go, and then just move the file or have the file somewhere on your Windows machine to then be able to work with it. Or if you are working on mobile, then you can always transfer the file back to your Windows machine to be able to connect to it and go from there. So the first thing you need to do is register a server. So I've got my server added. Typically, I'm just going to put localhost in here, or you can browse the network if you're working with a remote server. And you can also give it an alias if you want. As I say, I've already got mine registered here, so I'm just going to log in, sysdba master key. And now that we're logged in, we can see any databases that we've got registered on the server, or we can go ahead and add an existing database and go find one. So we can see here we've actually got the employee database from the samples directory already added in. So let's just go ahead and log into that. I'll say sysdba master key as the password for the sample. And now we can start seeing all the features of the database and the RDBS server running here. So we have a list of users for the server. We have server logs, and we have the ability to run backup operations. And then on the database, we have a number of different things linked in here. So if you remember to the start, a database management system allows you to manage users. It enables you to store data in a structured format. So in here we can see we have tables, and each table is a specific job. So we have the employee table here. And if we have a look at the employee data, the employee table, we can see that we have a set of data in here formed up in specific structure. If we go and have a look here, we can see that here's the name of the fields and also the type of field it is. So we have different types, and we can also define our own types using InterBase, which are called domains. So we'll have a quick look at those in a moment. But all the basic building blocks here for numbers, and we've also got one that's computed by, which is a calculation of another couple of fields to give us a value that we're always going to use. So for example, if you've got first name and last name, you can make a full name as a computed field rather than actually having to manage and update them and keep them in sync. So let's have a look at the metadata. Now the metadata describes this structure. Now the first thing we can see in here is we've got some domains, and I mentioned about InterBase having the ability to define specific types of fields. So what we can do here is we can say I want to have a field called country name, or a field type called country name, and that is going to be a varchar of 15 characters. Now why would you use domains when you could just say, oh, I've got this field here, it needs to be that size, make it that? Well, two reasons. One, it's actually quite useful to be able to define a specific field type and then use it in lots of different places. So for example, if you've got the first name and a last name defined, if you've got a first name in the employee table and maybe one in a staff table and maybe one in a customer table, then you can always just use the first name. Now if you find then, for example, that you need to change the field size or you need to update something around the field, you can update the domain and it will then update that field size everywhere. So a really good example of that may be telephone numbers in the past. They've changed the length of telephone numbers as the number of people have grown in an area and they've had to expand the number of telephones they've had. So if you had a phone number field, you could update the domain and then all fields in the database will then accept the new larger values. You also can add constraints to domains. So for example here, the department number has a constraint to check that the value matches certain criteria. We can also, so domains are quite useful. You know, there's a few different examples in the employee table here of different constraints being applied to domains. So that's domains. Here's the computed field. You can see computed by and then last name, and then this double pipe basically is this plus, and then we've got a comma and a space plus first name. So that's how you would concatenate string or bring strings together here within SQL. Now the other thing that we've got in here is constraints that are to do with the actual data and making sure that data is valid. Now this is called referential integrity. Now referential integrity allows us to define that a value must exist somewhere else in the database. So for example, the employee table has an employee number, and this is an integer value, and this is the primary key. So we know every single record is going to have a unique employee number. Now, if we're using the employee number to reference an employee from another table, then we need to make sure that number exists. So to do that type of thing, you can start adding foreign key constraints. So for example, here the employee table has a foreign key constraint to check the department number. So the department that an employee belongs to exists in the departments table and is in the field department number. So this is quite useful to make sure that if we add a department number to an employee, it actually exists as a department, because when you start querying and bringing and joining data together to get data that is built up from the employee table and maybe the department table, you need to make sure that the referential integrity works, because otherwise you query what the name of the department is from the department table, and it goes, well, I can't find that department. What does that mean? We can also have constraints that are checking, obviously, that a field value fits within a specific criteria. So this is another constraint that is being done here to make sure that the job code and the grade and the country, that the value of the salary for the salary field fits within the range of the minimum and maximum allowed salary for an employee from the country and the job code and the grade that they're working at. And we also have, looking in here, we can see that we have a trigger created. Now, a trigger allows us to fire an action that happens. And we can see here, this one happens after and before insert at position 0. And what it's doing is it's just saying, okay, I need to get an employee number field for the new value. Go and add in the employee number from a generator here. So this gen ID calls a generator. A generator is a sequential number to get the employee number. And here we can see we've also got this save salary change. This is where we've got some additional work going on to record the salary history. So this is an auditing action that's happening. So as data is being changed on a specific field, it's firing an action to record some data into another part of the database as an audit trail. So this is really important because you can pick up not only what's changed, but you could also pick up the user who's made the change, who's connected to the database if you're using multiple users to connect in. So this is really important part of database and data management. So we can see the metadata for that here, but that's kind of a bit hard to read. So let's go ahead and we can actually have a look here. We can use the actual icons to be able to jump in. So we can alter specific items. We can come in here and make some changes. We could add items. Can't drop it because it's got dependencies there. When just having a look at the columns, we could have a look at the triggers. You hear those triggers again that we just spoke about, and you can see the actual trigger, where it happens, the sequence, which is the order, and then the metadata for it. And we can have a look at the check constraints. We can have a look at any indexes that are built. Now, indexes allow you to say, well, I'm always looking for people by their last name. So let's build an index that lists everybody by their last name, first name. So when I run those queries, I've already got that in order, which makes it a lot quicker to sort through and find people that we need to. So indexing is quite a useful thing to do. Obviously, the more indexes you create every time you make a change to the data, there's more things that have to happen, so it can slow things down a little bit. But you use them correctly and they help your data fly. So yeah, that's the kind of the basic parts there. And we can see coming down the database here, we can have a look, we can see all the domains that exist. So we can create a domain, we can actually go and have a look and see all the domains in here, and find out what they are for. And we've had a look at the tables. Indexes just list the indexes. A view is quite a useful thing that allows you to maybe join different tables together and give a view of that data that's then a lot easier to query and work with. So for example here, we have a view that is bringing together the employees in the departments. Remember we were saying the department number needs to make sure that matches. Well, that's really important here. So what we're doing is we're joining the employee and the department table where the employee department number equals the department's department number. And then we can see here that these fields are uniquely named from each table, and it's going to list those back. So we can then see the data with a list from both tables showing side by side. So we can see 202 is Monterey, 210 is Monterey, 227 is Monterey. So we can see where all these things are linked back to. But the actual joining here is done on the IDs behind the scene. We also have stored procedures. Now, stored procedures allow you to run business logic within the database. And you can call these from triggers, you can call them directly through SQL. So what do these types of things do? Well, let's have a look. We've got one here to delete when we delete an employee. So what's happening here? So we pass in an employee number. And then we're just checking here purchase orders from the sales table. We're getting a count and inserting that into any sales. And if any sales is greater than 0, then we raise we need to reassign the sales. So this is actually stopping that action happening. And this is using another feature. This is an exception. So here we can actually define specific exceptions within the database. And we've got one called reassign sales. So let's go and have a look at the exceptions. And we've got one reassign sales. And the message here is reassign the sales records before deleting this employee. So this is really great because we can actually have database specific exceptions that mean something to the business that you can raise back to the application and stop you having to do things. And this controls the business logic at the data layer, which is really important when you've got lots of different data sources applications connecting into the same database. It means you don't need to build all your business logic into a middle tier. You can actually have some directly in the database and protect the data at the data layer. So yeah, we're having a look at the delete employee. So let's carry on down. We can then see that we've got other things happening here. So we're updating the department, setting the manager to be null for the employee, checking stuff around projects, deleting them from the employee projects, deleting their salary history if we need to. So wherever, this is kind of, it might be what you want to do, it might not be what you do, but the point is here that you can define a whole set of business logic that you run and happens through stored procedures, which are then managed and run on the database. Mentioned triggers. They're nice and easy. You create a new trigger. Let's call it my trigger. Oh, sorry, my generator. And it starts at 1, and every time that is run, it updates, and you can see this one's been run 145, this one's been run 1015. But you can then call these to, as we've seen already, to generate ID fields, to do automatic incrementing fields. You may want to have a sales order number that's unique for each sale order. So you can actually call the generator and say, hey, give me a number. And you just call the database, say, give me a number, give me a number, give me a number. You can then use that in your application. You can then post that through to the database with the record, or you could have it automatically assigned when you create the record. Multiple ways to use them, but really, really useful things to have. Now, I'm just going to show you just a couple of quick bits of verbiage to help you understand what these things mean. So create, obviously create something. Alter, we'll change it. So I can go ahead and let's alter this and let's set the initial value to be 5 here. The other thing that you'll see is drop. Now, what drop means is basically delete. So if I choose drop, it'll say, are you sure? I say, yeah. And that will allow me to take and get rid of it. Now, there are times that you can restrict drop actions from happening, specifically where they are required or they're used by other things within the database. It will actually physically stop that. But also with referential integrity, you can stop records from being deleted, or you can cascade those deletes. So for example, if you had a list of names and then you had some temporary data assigned to those names in other tables, if you deleted the main record, you might just want to clean up all that stuff. It's just temporary data, let's just get rid of it. So you can actually set that table just to remove anything on as a cascade delete based on the ID from one to the other. So it's quite a useful thing to be aware of. Blob filters, there's a field type called a blob, which basically is a binary list of bytes, and you can use that to store images or really big volumes of text or whatever. And you can create your own filters to be able to process and search through those as you wish. Roles allow you to define a role within the database and then assign users those specific roles. And then you've got user permissions, which are the users who can actually access the data. So for example, when you get onto doing advanced topics like encryption, you may want to have a role for HR manager and a role for HR. And the HR manager may be able to see and decrypt the salary information, but the HR user won't be able to. And what happens when you define multiple roles, a user can have one or many roles, and if they belong to that role, they'll be given the highest priority or access rights based on any role that they have to the data they're working on. So that way you can be really granular in terms of who can access what data, who can decrypt and encrypt certain data, and so on. So yeah, really, really powerful. So that's the basics of understanding how a DBMS work. Let's say the one thing I would say, it's worth kind of getting in, create your own tables, create some domains, use domains to, I really would recommend using domains. One little tip that I have, when you're reading the metadata and being able to work with it, I like to use d_ for domains and then give it a domain name. I find it a little bit easier to read metadata and to read things here. So you can see here that I've got my field, which has a d_ my new domain, and I've used the department number as another one, but you can just to show you can use them with or without any kind of specific naming convention. But that makes it, I think, for me, a little bit easier to identify, oh, this is a domain, and so on. You can come in here, play, make sure that the data works. For example, if I tried to change this to 111, so you see I've got foreign key constraint issue because 1111 doesn't exist. Because we have this constraint here to make sure the department number exists in that other table. So, great to have a play with those types of things. And so when you're building tables and you want to kind of come in, you can just create tables from in here. That will create a new one, or you can alter this one. You can add in fields. You can kind of give it a field name, select an existing domain. So it's let's say a country name, for example. You can specify individual data types if you wanted to, and do it without a domain. You can actually create a new domain in here. So you select the data type, select the field. So you can build everything up very, very quickly through the UI. You can say, right, actually this field needs to be unique. You could create foreign keys. You can create check constraints. Here I've got obviously the foreign key one. You can add, delete, edit those. So very, very easy to kind of get in, have a play. It's a great way to be able to start building. And then once you kind of got there, you can go and have a look at the metadata. You don't need to remember it or understand it, or you can just go use the UI to build it. And then you can go, look, I've got that. And you can then literally copy that out, or copy the bits that you need out, and then be able to use that directly in code if you need to, if you're doing update scripts built into applications and so on. So it's a great way to be able to rapidly get going and use the tools to help you write the scripts that you need. So before we finish off here, I'm just going to pull up RAD Studio, and I'm going to create a blank application here, and I'm just going to use, let's do a multi-device application, as InterBase can be used across multiple platforms. I'm just going to create a blank application here very, very quickly, and I'm just going to put down a grid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Data Explorer here. I've got FireDAC, I've got InterBase registered, I've already registered the employee database. So I can literally go and grab the employee table. Let's just pop it down here. And we can see we get the data connection for the database, the query. Here select staff from employee. We can see the data directly into the IDE. We can now use live bindings just to bring the grid and the query together. In fact, let's just leave that active for the moment. We can see the data now at design time. And with the bindings, with the binding source, we can actually add a navigator onto the form as well. And that will add in the different options for navigating and updating the data. So let's just go ahead and run. And we can now see we've got our data in here. We can go ahead and let's just change this to Forrest Gump and save. And if we close and reopen our application, we'll be able to see that our data has persisted straight into the database. So very, very easy to be able to hook up and connect and start using data in your applications, and get coding very, very quickly with some secure data storage. Now, if you do need to add your database in, you can also just drop down a TFD connection and choose the IB driver for InterBase, and then come through and just set up your database. So you can go choose the file, set your username and password. If you're using an encryption, You can set up the encryption details in here, the SE password, any advanced options, different SQL dialects, but this all defaults through pretty well. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so let's finish off just by having a quick chat about the InterBase licensing. So what I tried to do here is simplify the development process. So from being a developer, developing something, through to doing some internal testing, through to then maybe doing a trial with a customer or on your servers, and then through to maybe UAT testing if it's taking longer than 90 days as an initial point. Or if you're kind of distributing this out, then you probably need to do something with a full edition, and then into production. So we do have OEM licensing available. If you are a VAR and you want to be able to distribute InterBase with your products, we have special options for you to do trials with customers and all that kind of side of things. But typically for most people, as a developer, the developer edition is more than enough. If you want to develop, you can use that. You can also develop using the to-go trial and gets working with that, but be aware that's only 90 days. We also have the to-go subscription, which you can use all the way through your development lifecycle and all the way through to deployment. That has unlimited deployments with it. IB Lite is the same as InterBase to go, but it's restricted in terms of the number of transactions that you can have. That's the number of questions and queries that can be running to the database at the same time. It's limited to 200 megabytes on disk. You don't get access to the admin APIs to be able to back up, restore and validate your databases, and you don't get access to change views, which is a really kind of cool advanced feature of InterBase that we've not had time to look at in this session today. If you're getting through to deployment, then obviously you really want to be looking at the server edition for backends, or if you're deploying out within mobile applications, then probably the best option is the to-go subscription, which allows you to deploy as much of InterBase to go as you want across all the platforms and all the app stores. Now we do include license for InterBase to go for mobile as part of the RAD Studio Enterprise and Architect Edition. So if you are just looking for to go to run on mobile platforms, then it may be worth having a look at the Enterprise Edition because that's a perpetual license for deployment that comes with RAD Studio. Okay. Final thing, just in terms of the server edition, it's licensed for the server and then the number of users that you need. So you can buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're sold in 1s, 5s, 10s, 25s and 50. But if you're looking at a server, especially a web server, you're probably going to be looking at the unlimited license. That break-even point for that is around about 82 licenses. Then it works out to better to buy the unlimited license. And that license is a single server for as many users connecting in at the same time as you want, and it also includes the license for the hot backup. So if you have any disaster recovery plan running, InterBase, unlike other database engines out there, includes the hot backup license with that, and it gives you 8 calls out the box. So comparative feature wise, you're probably looking between $7,000 and $8,000 for an InterBase server with unlimited users, compared to close to around about 50,000 for similar spec with SQL Server, and 100,000 if you want the hot backup server. So it is an exceptionally affordable option and well worth having a look at for multiple different types of sizes of systems. But the one thing that's great about it is it grows with you. So if you start off small and you need to get bigger, then it's there and it will work. And even if you've got sites that are running 1 or 2 users, it's affordable for them at a few $100s a site rather than thousands. Okay, but please talk to sales specifically to get the right quotes and pricing for you. So I think that pretty much brings us to an end. Time to open up for some Q&A.
Excellent stuff. InterBase, which is a product for us from Embarcadero. And the good news is Stephen, who was just speaking, is with us live. Hello, Stephen. Oh, and he's putting his camera on as well, apparently.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you. But as I said earlier, that's fine. Right, we were joking in the private chat. So.
Well, it's saying it's enabled from here, but I obviously I can't see what's.
You
Let me
know,
have a look. Oh,
the one piece of technology that is. Are you using OBS Studio? Oh, there you go. Okay, I think
there we are. Yes.
there you go. Aha. OBS Studio, it's one of those things where when it works, it's great. And then occasionally it just shows that little symbol. I always know. Jim used to use it quite a lot, and he had virtual camera with it and it would break. So good stuff. I liked your explanation of InterBase. We did get a lot of questions, but it is that kind of time of the day where people just, gradually drop off. I feel like I've been awake for about 8 days at the moment, so I'm sure others are like that too. If we were to compare InterBase to, say, one of the other database systems out there in terms of, it's like an Access database or something like that, what would you say it kind of matches up against? Is that a fair comparison, or maybe it doesn't match up against anything?
Well, do you know what? I think one of the nice ways to think about it is probably make an analogy to car market. So you'd have your flat file, which is a bit like having a skateboard, and then and then you kind of progress up a little bit, and everything from like a micro car through to a top end Mercedes Benz.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that InterBase covers really, really well. So, when you look, a lot of developers are producing applications that they're providing out to a range of different businesses. And this is one of the things about InterBase, so much usage in, POS systems where you might have, hairdressers or something like that, where there's kind of one or two tills and it's a small shop, they've got a laptop running the whole place. They haven't got the infrastructure for a full server and stuff like that. InterBase's design is perfect for those types of environments because you haven't got a DBA on site, you haven't got everything else that you need there. It's a really low cost to be able to install it, and if that customer expands up, great, it will do whatever it needs to do. And then right up to customers like Opus Capita, who are doing literally 500,000 transactions a day at their peak point, which is that's thousands a second that have been processed. And it copes with that quite well as well. The machine that you've got there has got a lot more memory in it. It's got more cores on it, as you'd expect to be able to run that kind of process on any database. So it really covers that breadth of market in terms of the small right the way up. But there's going to be use cases right at the top of the market where you want kind of your high-end, Rolls-Royce and Bentley that needs to be doing X, Y, and Z, which you need to be paying for something that is specifically that type of car. And that's not really what InterBase is about doing. Go to Oracle and spend 500,000 or whatever. And where it competes really, really well is within most databases that enterprises are going to be wanting to use for SMBs and those type of businesses. So it does really, really well. And as I say, when you look at the comparisons of the features, to get the row level encryption, to get the column level encryption. So what that means is things like PCI compliance. If you're running a shop and you need to store specific details around credit cards that are being processed, and might be a till that's being used. We've had people using it off the back of a golf buggy on a golf course on a hot day, selling ice creams and drinks to people, and then bringing it back in and then syncing all the data up and processing everything later. You need to store that data encrypted at rest. To have full PCI compliance, you need to use a different encryption key for your credit card details than you would be using for personal identifiable data. So that type of thing, to run that off SQL Server, you need the full enterprise edition. And, as I said, you'd be looking at 50 grand for a server. Whereas InterBase is from a couple $100 upwards. So it's amazing, and to have all that same encryption capability and flexibility in a mobile application just kind of gives you a real understanding about the flexibility that it offers in terms of developers being able to take that core capability they need and not have to worry about where they're going to get it to later on. You can just build it, embed it, deploy, and just relax about it. So which is
I think it kind of goes back showed about the security of your apps and static code analysis and things like that. That actually this kind of thing, I spent probably 2/3 of that session explaining why security is important. At the corporate level, because if you're a developer who's just an individual contractor, it might not be obvious to you. If you're in a corporate environment, there are a lot more people who are compliance people that are going to come and stand on your shoulders and say, "Hey, wait a minute, you've got to handle the data in ways that are legally compliant and secure." But I think that this is the point about things like that encryption, as you said, encrypting at rest is actually not just something that you're legally required to do in order to comply with GDPR, for example. It's not just like, oh, it would be nice if you did that. It is, no, you have to do that. And actually many databases don't do that. MySQL doesn't do that, for example. It's not encrypted at rest, for example. SQL Server, as far as I'm aware, it depends on settings, but I don't think that's encrypted at rest either. So
no,
it's about comparing them properly, nuances of what the differences are. Not this is a database, this is a database. No, look at the actual what it can do, the capabilities. So,
yeah, no, it's very important. I think I did a webinar a few years back, probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, actually looking at the security around InterBase and what was in there. And one of the use cases we looked at was a story from Blue Cross Blue Shield in the US, who had data that was saved on hard drives in their data center. Now, those hard drives were not even in a PC, not connected to anything, in a locked cupboard in a data center. And unfortunately, they had a break-in. Somebody stole those hard drives, and the data that was on there had personal identifier information and recordings of discussions about medical history and so on. And it ended up costing them over $2 million in fines for not storing that data correctly. And it wasn't even in a PC. So
well, it's funny you should say that, because one company I worked at, I was actually going on holiday and I got a phone call at 5 a.m. on my day off, which was kind of annoying. And they said, "Oh, we've been robbed." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And actually we went in and they had been robbed, and they'd actually been robbed, they believe, by a nefarious competitor. Because what happened was these people were not trying to steal stuff. What they did was they broke into things like locked backup cabinets. And this was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And they had backups that were on gold CDs and stuff like that. Some are up the bank, you must grandfather, father, son type backups. In the days before the internet was actually usable for backups. And they took all those backups out and smashed all the backups, which was a key sign that this was a not your normal break-in. And when you're looking at a disaster recovery plan, one of the things that doesn't enter into your mind is that someone will break in and steal all of your database server and leave the server behind, which is one of the things that happen. And it's exactly what you're talking about. Now, luckily, actually, I've been in the business a long time, and I used to work for very big organizations like Dictaphone and Rover and things like that. So we did have good data. What's the word? Husbandry, I think, is the word I'm looking for. But
governance.
Governance. But if you've got something like InterBase that's actually doing a lot of that work for you, it helps offload that kind of brain power that's required to deal with it. I mean, you can't, if you invent an idiot-proof system, they'll just invent a better kind of idiot. But it does help if it is actually easier to manage, and that's, as you say, it's zero administration, I think is the way the phrase you use, or something like that.
It's literally zero administration. And I was lucky. I was an InterBase VAR for a number of years, almost a decade actually. And we used to do health club software for health clubs and the leisure industry. And we at the time we merged with another software house that was a .NET house, and they were using SQL Server. They had about 100 sites that they were looking after. They had 2 full-time DBAs managing those sites on the support side. Literally, it was, customers paid for it. We had 2 DBAs managing 100 sites. InterBase, the staff got 15 minutes of training for what they needed to do for support. 15 minutes, literally day one, 15 minutes of training. That's all you need to know. And we were supporting over 500 sites on InterBase. And everybody in the support department. It's literally 15 minutes of training. Anybody could deal with any question that came through. Compared to having 2 full-time DBAs. Now, DBAs for SQL Server are not cheap. That was that was about 80 grand a head on support costs. You're looking at about 150, 160,000 a year just to support those sites above and beyond. So when you look at the ongoing cost, and as a software house, you're looking at kind of what your bottom line is, how you can be affordable, how you can manage stuff. People go, oh yeah, well, we can get a free version of SQL Server that we can put some stuff out on there, and if they get big enough, then they can pay for the full version and they can move on from there. That's good, isn't it? That's free. That's better than paying a couple $100. Well, actually, you look on the flip side at actually how much extra you're spending to keep those people skilled up on your support team to do what they need to do to manage those sites that you're getting your customers to not pay something for. Whereas it's a false economy. So it really is. It's amazing how it picks up and goes. So
some of the big systems I've been involved in were things to do with like Tesco and stuff like that. They had all their cleaners before COVID happened. That was an interesting experience for everybody, I think. But they also had security guards as well at various centres, and Amazon, I think, was involved at one point. And it wasn't InterBase, I have to say, but the point here was the millions of processing records that were being processed for time and attendance, because that's how it was. There were thousands and thousands of employees that were part-time or contract, clocking in and out, and security guards that were doing tours around the building. And a security guard has to actually clock in and out at various locations, so he's been to that location. Apparently you can't just trust a guy who's in security. You have to check up on him, the way these things go. But the thing there was that we scored points as a supplier because the Delphi apps would just run and run and run and run and run. And again, it was the same thing. There were no DBs and no DBAs because they weren't required. And there were no specialist IT people involved, because the Delphi apps would just be installed on the server, and that would be the last to hear of it. They could upgrade the operating system and all the rest of it, and things would just carry on working. So, there's a winning combination there. If you've got an InterBase that's got that kind of zero administrative overhead, and you've got Delphi and apps that are rock solid, reliable, and so what? So you updated .NET to something else. Oh, you've installed a new version of Python. Don't care. We just had that today. Someone messed up their PHP install, and it keeps on working. And that's the combination. That's why I like Embarcadero. We're providing solutions that make a lot of sense. Okay, well, we've reached our witching hour for day 2. Which feels like day 10 to me, but it's all good. Great session. Have we got you again? I think we have. Haven't you? You're back again for a different session? Is this the only one?
No, I think it's just the one here. We've got another one coming up. There's a comment in the chat actually about RAD server tutorials. Now we've actually got coming up at the end of the month, there's going to be a webinar, which I'm not sure has been published yet, but we're looking at a case study of a RAD server application, and it's actually one that we built to run some stuff around events for in the UK, and it's actually been used at other events since then to help kind of capture information that we needed from developers who were attending the events because they wanted stuff sent to them afterwards. So we're going to go through that and talk a bit about RAD server, and there's also some news there. We've actually got an update to kind of the PDF and the white paper books that have been going around with RAD server. David I's book that Patrick's posted a link to is a few years back now. Still very relevant and great content in there. But we've actually got some new stuff that Antonio Zapatero has been working through, and new set of samples and some kind of new videos and a new chapter layout that make it a lot easier to consume and work through. So we've got the first set of those coming through soon, and then we plan to kind of get a few more chapters out month by month as we go through. So definitely worth having a check.
And actually, thinking of InterBase as well, the Python driver has just been released as well. That's available. I think there's a session coming up from Python guy. They did one session already. I think we've got another one do as well. But there is, if you're a Python programmer and you want to try out InterBase, there's a Python driver available on PyPy, or actually just go to the InterBase site and there's some scan that link that way. Scan that link and you'll go to it, but that's available as well. So we're not trying to lock you into specifically using Delphi, although I think you should. If you use anything else, you're a fool. There the Python driver, and the drivers from other technologies as well, I think, to get to InterBase. So
yeah, there's been quite a few coming through. It's been something we're spending quite a bit of time focusing on at the moment. So yeah, we're getting a huge amount of requests coming through for it. And thank you, Patrick, for posting the link in for the RAD server case study webinar.
How is he still awake? He was there early and he's there late. He's there every single day. He's an absolute star. As merci, Patrick. I've said this several times. Salut, Patrick. Every day I say hello to him because he's a good MVP. Really appreciate his help because he does help us out quite a lot. And we even had some people asking questions in French today, so it was all good stuff. All right, well, thanks a lot, Stephen. It's always good to talk to you. We'll bump into each other again, I'm sure. And thanks to everybody that's watching. And thanks once again to Martha, our producer, who's in the background, who works extremely hard and never seems to sleep. And someone's asked a question. Yeah, can you, what was this? Before you leave, can one set the size for the structure window, an object inspector window in design mode, and another size? Oh, that's to do with the IDE. Yes, you can. You set it to what you want, and then if you go into view, say save desktop, and set the desktop settings. It's a desktop setting. Email me, ian.barker@embarcadero.com, and ask me that question. I'll tell you what the answer is. It's very easy to do. Yeah.
There was also a message, I think, in the private chat from Martha, just asking if you can remind people to register up for day 3.
Oh yes, okay. Actually, we've even got some barcodes for that. Let me do that before. Because otherwise Martha will have a fit that I haven't done that. Let me see. Tickers, I think we have. Here we go. There it is. This one here should come up. A bit of a delay. Go here and register this. Yes. Okay, that's fine. And I think there's also a QR code for that as well. If you go to the Coding Bootcamp. Yeah. Okay. She's clicked that for me. Okay, yes, please register. The reason that we want you to register is partly because it shows you to us that people are interested. We're not just talking out into the nowhere. I mean, we know how many people are registering. It's been many thousands, actually. It's been very successful. But also by registering, there's a benefit to you. And the benefit is that every time you register, once you've registered, if you miss a session or something like that, or you want to get the slides or any of the example source code, we'll automatically email you with the links. Usually, I think the next day or something like that, but we will get to it because of how busy we are. So please register if you haven't already. And if you're watching us on YouTube, because I know that we use streaming live to YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. If you can look down at the bottom, click on the little like button and click on the subscribe button with the little bell. The reason we do that is if you do that, then it helps to acknowledge that this is a stream that people might find interesting to do with Delphi and coding, and it does actually help us a lot. So if you're on our side, please go and click like and subscribe, and it'll really help us. See, I sound like a proper influencer now. It's
sounds like some of the stuff my son watches on TV.
That's the one. Yeah, I'm not going to do any
like and subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe now. Yeah, I think we have to eat like super hot.
If I get 1,000 likes in the next hour, I'm going to eat a cat.
Exactly. I tell you, I've got some very hot chilies out there. If you're up for it, we'll do the challenge. I'll probably win. I live in Texas. We've got lots of very spicy food. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good. I hope everybody's had fun, and we'll see you all again tomorrow. Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks, Martha and Eli, if you're still around, and all the others that turned up today.